Too bad. I'm going to take it off anyway. No. So 2 things before I start. Number 1, if Pastor Darrell has not shared with you any of his Y experiences at the gym, at the Y, you need to ask him some stories. I know he'd love to share them. He has some good ones. And also, Ryan, I want to see that guitar up front, buddy, on Sunday morning, because that is awesome. And you junior hires, I know that you don't understand, and that's okay. Guitars are awesome because of the 80s. It's all right. If you don't understand, that's okay. So I walk around a lot, so the guy with the camera, you're going to have to follow me. Enjoy. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 7 tonight, so if you want to turn there, you can. Matthew chapter 7, and the girls read the passage that we're going to be covering. But before we get into that, I actually want to... I know you guys have been studying the book of John, and that is an awesome book. And I strongly recommend that when you're done studying it in here, keep reading it, and keep reading it, and keep reading it, because the story of Jesus' life is the most impacting story that you will ever encounter. And I promise you that. So I want to share with you guys how I came to Jesus. That's what I want to share with you guys tonight. I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was a pastor. My grandfather was a pastor. And I am a 3rd-generation pastor, and I swore that I would never be a pastor. So that's where we're going to start. I grew up in Maine, and Dad was an associate pastor at one point, and then he was an interim pastor at a couple of churches. And I learned how to lie really well about who I was. I learned all the right answers from my Sunday school classes, and when I got into youth group, I was 13, because they didn't let 6th graders in at that point. And I prayed a prayer in front of one of the leaders with one of my friends, and that is what I clung to for a long time, that prayer. I prayed a prayer, and that was what I was saying. That's what makes me a Christian. I prayed a prayer. And I don't know if you have doubts or if you have questions about your own relationship with Jesus, but for me at that point, it was not a relationship. It was just about me praying a prayer. And that was it. We moved from Florida to Massachusetts when I was 13, going into 8th grade. And that was an extremely traumatic experience for me. I hated my parents for it, even though it wasn't their fault. But even more, I hated the fact that God made us move. It made me furious. So I went to a Christian school, and it was a pretty small school. There was more alcohol and drugs and sex going on in that school than there was in the public school in my town. And all through high school, I lived the lie. I had that facade up. Go to youth group, and I knew the answers to the questions, and I semi-paid attention, and soccer became my life. I played soccer in high school, and I was pretty good. Not great, but I was pretty good. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn at all. I won, I was put on the all-state team my senior year, and I played goalie. I was the most insane person on the field. I have ADHD, and you can tell, because I walk around a lot, I never sit still, and oh, look, a squirrel. You know, I mean, it's just like, that's how my brain works. In fact, I used to be a youth pastor before here, and my students used to tell me that those were my monkey moments. You know, you'd be like talking and conversing, and all of a sudden you see a monkey in your head, and it's like, oh, look at the monkey. You know, those were my ADHD moments. Anyway, but I was extremely intense, and soccer became my idol. It was what I lived for. That and girls. And that was it. That was all I wanted out of life. And I know for a fact, I don't even have to know you, but I know for a fact some of you are like that. And for you ladies, maybe it's not girls, it's boys. I want to tell you something. God has something to say about that. And it's in Deuteronomy, which is in the Old Testament. It's in chapter 5, and I'm not going to ask you to turn there, but you can write it down if you want to. Deuteronomy 5 and verse 6. He's talking to Moses. And if you don't know who Moses is, he was the guy that led the nation of Israel out of Egypt and through the wilderness, and he was supposed to take them into the promised land. And he told Moses this. He says in verse 6, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You ready? Because this is the first of the 10 commandments, the first of the 10 commandments, and has everything to do with the fact that I elevated soccer, or my sport, and girls that was the priority in my life. This is it right here, verse 7. You shall have no other gods before me. Guess what soccer was to me? It was a god. It was my idol. It was what I worshiped. From the time of my junior year on through my senior year, I don't think there was a day that went by that I did not at least kick the soccer ball around a little bit. The summer between my junior year and my senior year, I spent every single day, or at least 4 hours, on the soccer field or running, kicking the ball, every single day. It was my life. It was my God. And I did not care about the fact that God wrote that law, that command. You shall have no other gods before me. I didn't care. I was still living on that prayer, remember? Sounds like a Bon Jovi song. I was living off of that, and that's what I was elevating that and saying, I'm okay, I have fire insurance, it's all good. All the while, I had another god, two actually, in my sport and in girls. And I went to college. I went to Florida for a couple of years, down at a school down there, and I'm going to refrain from telling you which one. But I went to that school for 2 years. Same thing. Soccer, girls. And I scheduled all of my time around my beach time. All my classes were scheduled on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and half of Thursday. And then I had one class on Friday morning, and after class, I was at the beach. And I would go and I'd play soccer on the beach or volleyball, and then I would look at the atmosphere, okay, at the beach. Okay? And you guys can laugh about that, but I'm standing up here and I'm telling you the truth. It wasn't right. I was living out sin, and it was perverse. And if you don't know what perverse means, look it up, start using it as a word. It's a good word. Well, it's actually a bad word. It's not a bad word. It means bad things. I'm taking it. That's an ADD moment. Just delete. Okay. But I still didn't care. I just didn't care. And the summer between my the summer after my sophomore year in college, I worked at a camp up in Maine, a Christian camp. And that was the first time I ever really opened my eyes to the fact that being a Christian didn't mean that you had to be bored. It didn't mean that you had to live in a monastery and wear a robe and say, Om, all the time. And I know that some of you guys think that being a Christian is boring. Let me tell you something. Being a Christian is not boring. I can promise you that. But you can't have idols. And that was a problem for me. That next semester, I started school again, and I broke my wrist. And for a soccer goalie, that's a career ender. I can't bend my wrist anymore. That's it. That's as far back as it goes. So I decided I was going to join the Marine Corps. Well, guess what they do in boot camp? A lot of push-ups. Guess what you have to be able to do with your wrist if you're going to do push-ups? You have to be able to bend it. So that was out. I was mad. I mean, talk about mad. I was mad when I was in 8th grade, moving up from Florida to Massachusetts. At this point, my idol was taken away. Now my God was taken away from me. And I was furious. And all the while, the Lord was just prompting in my heart, saying, Tim, wake up. You're not my child. And I kept pointing back to that time when I prayed a prayer when I was 13 years old, and I was living off of that and saying, I prayed the prayer, I'm good. Don't hassle me. I have my fire insurance. Don't even ask me to change, because I really don't want to change. So I transferred schools from Florida to a school up in Wisconsin. It was why I transferred from where I was to Wisconsin, I don't know. Yeah. I never became a Green Bay fan because of the Green Bay fans up in Wisconsin. They're just a little bit nuts. So, yeah. But I went to this tiny little Bible college up there. It was obviously the Lord putting me there. And my first semester there, I was miserable because I couldn't play soccer. I walked on to try out for the soccer team, and the coach said, Tim, unless you're here to play in the outfield, I've already heard about your previous injury. You go ahead and pack up and leave. And I was like, what? How dare you tell me I can't play? I'm way better than your goalie you have, I guarantee it. And of course I wasn't, but you know, I wanted to worship my God of soccer. And so I wasn't allowed to play soccer. And ironically enough, the girls at a Bible college actually were interested in spiritual things and not so interested in being stupid. So I was striking out with both of my gods. Big time, striking out. I was miserable. Absolutely miserable. And one night, we had devotions in our room, and one of my roommates, Mike, he said, I've been reading through Matthew and through the Sermon on the Mount, and I got to share with you guys what's going on. And he read these verses. Starting in verse 15, chapter 7, he says, And this is Jesus talking. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but a diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, you will recognize them by their fruits. And I was like, uh-oh. Because all of a sudden it became very clear that the prayer that I had prayed was just hot air and words coming out of my mouth. It did nothing. Because my heart wasn't there. I didn't have a relationship. It never changed who I was. It never impacted me. And if you continue on, he says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Hang on. My prayer, all of my hopes and dreams on that prayer when I prayed when I was 13 were crumbling before me. He says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who's in heaven. And I was like, oh boy, I'm in trouble. Verse 22, it says, and on that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do mighty works in your name? And I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. In the King James, it says iniquity. I like that word really good too, because I'm not very good with words and I like big words, because it makes me seem smarter than I am. But he says, depart from me. In other words, get out of here. Get out of my face. You're not mine. And I was like, oh man, I'm in trouble. There was about 2 months left in the semester when Mike went through this with us in our room. And every day I kept thinking of the words, depart from me, you worker of iniquity. Depart from me, depart from me, depart from me. And I just could not get that out of my head. And that summer, I ended up working at camp there as a lifeguard. And I had a much better physique then than I do now, but that's okay. Old age happens. I was a lifeguard. And during training week, one of my roommate during training week, he was one of the counselors for the senior high. His name was Carl. Carl Jensen, good guy. And I remember coming back to the room one night after we had a speaker that shared kind of his heart, and I came away. I don't remember what he said. I have no idea what the guy talked about. But I come away thinking, I'm not Jesus's. I don't have a relationship with him. And all those years that I tried to fool myself into thinking that, yeah, that prayer worked, that was all I needed, I was fooling myself, and I was idolizing, really, myself by having other gods. And I remember having a conversation with Carl, and he said, well, Tim, what's keeping you from accepting Christ? I mean, you're obviously under conviction. You're obviously the Holy Spirit's working in you. What's keeping you from doing that? And I was on scholarship. I had a scholarship to the school, and I had cheated in almost all my classes that semester. And I said to him, well, Carl, I know I'd lose my scholarship, and I'd have to get all that stuff right. I'd have to go back and talk to the administration, and I'm sure I'd fail, my classes, and I'd lose my scholarship. And he goes, Tim, that's a stupid reason to go to hell forever. I'm like, dude, have a little compassion. I'm hurting here. He's like, yeah, you're being an idiot. He's like, that's a dumb reason to go to hell forever. And I said, well, this conversation's over. And we went to bed. We went to sleep. Well, he went to sleep. I hardly slept that night. I got up the next morning, and I went to the camp director, and I said, listen, Jeff, I'm not a believer, and I'm done. I'm done running away. I'm done trying to do all this on my own. I'm done trying to have other gods before God. I want to actually share something, because we have a couple minutes. I actually want to share something that happened 2 weeks prior to that, okay? 2 weeks prior to that, I went home after the semester. And one night, because during all this, my oldest sister was going through a divorce. My middle sister was going through a kind of a crisis in her life. My parents were on deputation to go to the mission field, and I felt very, very alone. And I remember I think I was like 19 or 20. I was 20. And I remember going out for a walk. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning in the town I grew up in. And I remember walking up over this bridge, over these railroad tracks, and I remember just looking up into the sky and telling God, shaking my fist at him and saying, you leave me the blank alone. I don't want to have anything to do with you. I don't want to have anything to do with your church. I'm sick of you. Just leave me alone. But it's funny, because God wasn't done working in me, and he wasn't going to leave me alone. And he didn't let me be comfortable. And I'm so glad. Because if he'd have done what I asked him to do, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be married to my wife. I wouldn't have 5 kids. I'd be a mess. Maybe dead. I don't know. But I remember going and talking to Jeff that next morning after I talked with Carl and just saying, I need Jesus. Because I'm done running. I'm done fighting. I can't do it. So we prayed. I have no idea what I prayed. That's the cool thing. But I do know that I accepted Jesus, his payment on the cross, because I knew that I couldn't pay for anything on my own. I couldn't pay for my sins, and there were a lot of them. And I asked for him to come and live in me. That part I do remember. And then after that, I remember talking to Jeff, because he was one of my teachers, and telling him I cheated in his class. And he said, well, we're going to have to adjust your grade. And I said, well, I got a bunch of other teachers I need to talk to as well. And he said, well, take the day, go and get it right. And guess what? I lost my scholarship. And I failed the semester with a 1.62. Yeah, I'm smart. I had to drop out of school that next semester because I didn't have the money to go, and I didn't want to get loans or whatever to try and pay for school. You know what the awesome thing is? God provided a job. God provided finances for me to go back to school. Yep, it took me 7 years to get a 4-year degree. But guess what? I finished owing $400, and that's it. Because God took care of it. I wish I had more time. There was a time when I didn't have any money and I was going to have to leave for the semester because we were only about halfway through the semester and I ran out of cash. There was a church that Miriam and I were actually working in as interim youth people, and they called me up at like 5 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, and the pastor was like, "Hey, by the way, this is weird. The Lord prompted someone in our church, and they said that they wanted to give you some money for your schooling." And I was like, "How much?" And he said, "It's $1,200. I was like, "Are you kidding me?" He's like, "No, I'm not kidding." And I said, That's how much I need for my payment this month, and I don't have it. It was unbelievable. And I'm not saying that if you accept Jesus, that everything's going to be hunky-dory, it's going to be candy and roses for the rest of your life, because it's not. Being a Christian is tough. At one point, like right afterwards, I actually had just met my wife that semester. Obviously, she wasn't my wife at the time. They thought that I had cancer. That was tough. That same semester, about 3 weeks later, I lost a friend. He died in a motorcycle accident. That was tough. I did have to drop out of school at times. I sat out for 3 semesters. It was tough, especially with your parents out of the country, and you're like, where am I going to go? I don't know, but you can't stay in the dorm. That was tough. But all the way through, God took care of it. He helped me, even in the midst of tremendous turmoil. He never let me down. It didn't always work out the way I wanted it to, or hoped that it would, but I was always able to point back and say, man, that was awesome. Do you see what God did there? That's incredible. And sometimes it wasn't until like a year or 2 later, and I was like, oh, I get it. Because, I'm a little slow. But I don't know where you are in your spiritual walk. I don't know if you have a relationship with Jesus. I hope you do. But I'm also not an idiot. And I know in a group this size, there's a pretty big percentage of you that are questioning. Whatever your reason is for not having that relationship and starting that relationship, whatever your reason is, that's a dumb reason to go to hell forever. Okay? I'm just going to tell you that straight up. Maybe some of you in here just don't give a flying flip about God because you've got your idols. My prayer for you is not going to be a happy one, and you're probably not going to like it, but I pray that God makes you miserable. And that through that it draws you to Him. Because there's no joy outside of Him. None. Zip. And if you get to the end of your life and you have all the Sunday school answers, guess what He's going to tell you if you've never had that relationship with Him? He's going to tell you, Matthew 7, verse 23, and I declared to them, I never knew you. Depart from me. And I don't want any of you to have to face that. So we're going to close with a word of prayer. I guess, actually, we'll have the band come up and I'll pray so that it's not awkward for them. So let's pray. Lord, I thank you so much. Number one, for your love for us, because, well, we couldn't have a relationship with you without it. And none of us deserve it because we're all a mess. And if we're honest, probably some of us in here really are struggling with whether or not we really want to be in a relationship with you, because it's not easy. I pray, Lord, that your Holy Spirit would work in each and every heart here. And if they're yours, solidify it. Help them to live it out and to be bold about it. Don't be afraid. Help them to have joy in that relationship with you. Help them to live it out in front of their friends, in front of their enemies, in front of their peers, in front of their parents, in front of their siblings, whoever. Help them to live it out. Lord, I pray that you please be with those that are struggling, that have questions, have doubts. Maybe they're doing what I was doing and just expecting a prayer to be the thing that gets them to you instead of a relationship. I pray that you would help them understand and see whether or not they truly are yours. And if they're not, I pray that you would draw them to yourself. Help them to see that whatever their reasoning is, it's selfishness and pride, and they need to just let go of that, because that's a stupid reason to go and be separated from you for all eternity. And Lord, I know that there are some here that just don't care. They're here because of friends. They're here because of girls or boys or being interested in I don't know, the social aspect. Lord, I pray that you'd break their hearts, whatever it takes. And I know that's extreme, but I'd so much rather have something extreme happen and have them be in your arms than have them just have a comfortable life and then be separated from you for all eternity because they never got to know you. I pray these things in your name, Lord. I pray that you would do it.